A UK-based research group concluded Israeli tank likely killed 6-year-old Palestinian child, Hind Rajab. Investigation revealed that Rajab's car was hit with 355 bullets, and it's not plausible that Israeli tank couldn't see children inside the car. Have you seen the reports, and do you have any updates on the investigation? It's been more than 4 months, and a lot of my colleagues have been asking about that.
Yeah, so we have seen the reports, and I will tell you what our latest interaction with the government of Israel is about this. So we went to the government of Israel and pressed them for information, and they told us that there were no IDF tanks operating in the area.
So who shot the 355 tank bullets?
I'm not able to, look, I'm not on the ground. I can't offer any kind of
So
assessment.
the municipality of Gaza fixed the water pipes last week, but 2 days ago, Israeli forces dropped a bomb on the team who worked on restoring the water system, and the bomb killed Anwar al-Jindi, which is director of water and environment at Gaza municipality, and 4 other water technicians. I know you're going to tell me that maybe there were Hamas people next to them embedded, but isn't this excuse like, is this still valid after 8 months of, and like hundreds and hundreds of healthcare have died because of that?
So I can't tell you anything about this specific strike because I don't have any details.
Firstly, just to follow up on this, is it really an independent investigation if the alleged culprits are the ones conducting the strike?
What I said, we thought it's appropriate for the government of Israel to investigate.
Over the weekend, we saw that the Israeli army in the occupied West Bank had a wounded Palestinian man strapped to the jeep and so on. So this is really, by the way, I raised this issue many times before this war, many times, because the Israelis have done this practice since 1967. I don't want to go into details of every incident and so on, but isn't that basically the army using Palestinians as a human shield?
So I will say we saw that video. It was shocking. The practice was absolutely unacceptable. Humans should never be used as human shield.
Moving on to the Middle East. So the secretary right now is meeting with the Israeli defense minister.
He is.
What is he telling him, and what are you hoping to hear from him?
So he is emphasizing a few things in his meeting with the defense minister. Number one, our ongoing commitment to Israel's security. Number two, the importance of Israel developing robust, realistic plans for the day after the conflict, plans that include path towards governance, towards security, towards reconstruction. We've obviously been working on these same ideas with partners in the region and engaging in conversations with Israel, but we think it's important that Israel put forward its own ideas. He's going to emphasize the need to avoid further escalation of the conflict. And then he will, as always, emphasize the need to improve humanitarian access, where we have seen somewhat of a slowdown in access in the south. And the secretary is going to emphasize to the minister that we want to see that situation reversed, and he'll hope to hear concrete commitments from him to work on that problem.
Okay. And are you expecting there to be any kind of a result from this meeting?
Look, we always hope to make progress on all these issues when we have these meetings with our Israeli counterparts, and we'll look for that today.
Okay, so no.
No, yes, we look to make progress on all of these issues. We have, but that said, this is one of a number of meetings the secretary's had with the defense minister, and we've had a back and forth with them about all of these topics. But in each of those meetings, certainly we hope to walk out with commitments for them to do more to address all of these areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Israeli prime minister said that the fighting, specifically in Rafah, is winding down. The intense fighting is winding down. What have they told you specifically on that issue? Or have they given you a timetable or what have you? And what is your assessment of what that means exactly, that it's winding down according to Israel, and with the risk playing up north?
So I don't want to get into too much detail about our conversations with respect to these matters, but they have told us much the same of what you have seen them now say publicly, which is that they are getting close to an end to major combat operations in Rafah. And so I will let them speak to what that means and what future deployments will look like. But from our perspective, what it means is the importance of working on all these plans for the day after the conflict, because we don't want to see in Rafah what we've seen in Gaza City and what we've seen in Khan Yunis, which is the end of major combat operations, and then the beginning of Hamas reasserting control and reasserting activity in those areas. And we have been quite consistent that for there to be an enduring defeat of Hamas, there needs to be a plan for what replaces them. And what replaces them needs to be Palestinian-led governance. It needs to be realistic security plans. It needs to be realistic reconstruction plans. And that's what we continue to work towards with our Arab partners in the region, and as we continue to push the government of Israel to properly consider.
Thank you. The Prime Minister of Israel also said over the weekend, or claimed, that the U.S. That Israel has seen a dramatic decrease in U.S. munitions to Israel. Could you explain to us what the Biden administration understands from his word decrease, and whether that's correct?
I don't understand what that comment meant at all, in the same way that I didn't understand the comments that we discussed last week when we heard them make similar claims. We have paused one shipment of high payload munitions. That shipment remains on pause. It remains under review. There are other weapons that we continue to provide Israel, as we have done going back years and years, because we are committed to Israel's security. And there has been no change in that, so I'm not sure what those comments refer to.
Can you comment at all on whether there has been a change in the amount or surging of weapons at the start of this conflict versus now, and whether that might have?
So I can't give you a kind of week by week, month by month outline of the amount of weapons. There are weapons commitments that we have made to the government of Israel going back years. We've talked about this some before, about how there are times when they order from us, pay the United States for, let's say just for example, 20,000 of a particular munition, and they take delivery when they make the order of 5,000, and there remain 15,000, and they come back to us and ask for more. Obviously, they were making intense requests at the beginning of the conflict, and we were fulfilling those requests. They continue to make requests, and we continue to fulfill those requests. So I can't tell you whether they are lower today than they were in October. It may be either because they have requested less or they've run up against headroom. I can't give you that kind of sort of graphic description, but overall, the programs have not changed. We continue to meet the requests that they have made to us. We continue to meet our statutory obligation to ensure that Israel remains a qualitative military edge over other countries in the region, and that will continue to be our policy because our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad.
Do you have a specific response in Gaza? There was a strike overnight on a medical clinic that reportedly killed the director of the ambulance and emergency department. Obviously, there's been a lot of comments from the US about the importance of protecting humanitarian workers. Have you been able to verify anything about that incident, and do you have a comment on it?
So I don't have an assessment of what actually happened. This looks to be another one of these incidents where it's very hard to get at the bottom line truth, and it goes to the very nature of this conflict. So you have disturbing reports and videos from the ground. You have claims a strike on humanitarian workers, and you have the government of Israel saying that they were targeting a legitimate Hamas target and that there were militants in this facility hiding behind civilians. Obviously, militants should not hide behind civilians. That has been the case from the beginning. And Israel needs to take all precautions to minimize civilian harm. This goes to the problem of this, it goes to the very nature of this conflict and why it is so difficult, and the problem that Israel faces is so difficult, but again, it doesn't minimize their need to do everything possible to minimize civilian harm. I would just say this gets back to why we continue to push so hard for a ceasefire, because as long as you have ongoing conflict, you are going to face this problem where Israel is going to target legitimate military targets, militants. But sometimes those militants are going to be in close proximity to civilians. And as long as that is the case, you're going to continue to have these tragic incidents, which is why we want to see a ceasefire.
Just specifically on the Defense Minister Gallant, he's talked about in some of his public comments a phase C in the conflict. Is there a joint understanding of what that means? What is phase C?
I will let him speak to what he meant by that. Obviously, we talked to them about what their military operations look like, and we talked to them about when they transition from one phase to the other, and how they hope to get to a point where they're not in major combat operations, where they hope to get to a place in Rafah where they are in the north and where they are in Khan Yunis, where you don't have brigades actively on the ground engaged in day-to-day combat. But in terms of what they mean by that, I think it's appropriate for letting them speak to.
There's been some comments from Israeli officials talking about, over a long period, but talking about the future security arrangements in Gaza. You talked a little bit about the sort of post-war future. I wonder, is there an agreement between the US and Israel on what that might look like? Who's actually going to be in charge? In the meantime, when they seem to be moving towards that, you've been talking about this as something that's going to happen, off in the future. But if they're actually moving to that situation, I think you've said before, you don't want to see the Israelis reoccupy Gaza. Isn't that kind of what we're heading towards?
So there is no agreement. We do not want to see them reoccupy Gaza, which is why we continue to push for an alternative to that. And you've heard the Secretary say this, that absent a plan for security in Gaza after the conflict and absent a political path forward, you will end up with one of two things. One is Israeli occupation, or two is this state of anarchy where Hamas can reassert control. And neither of those are acceptable to us. We don't think either of those are in Israel's interest, obviously, either, which is why we continue to work on plans for an alternative proposal.
Following up on that specifically, Netanyahu said over the weekend that there's the possibility that Israel would need to establish temporary military control over civilian life in Gaza. Is that something that the U.S. would temporarily support?
We oppose military control. Look, they have temporary military control now, but we want to see that end. We want to see it transition to a different security environment and ultimately transition to a reunified Gaza and the West Bank. Now, you're not going to get there overnight. There has to be a transition plan. There has to be a path to get there. What that looks like and when a different authority could take control are all things that we need to work out with our partners in the region and ultimately with the government of Israel.
Do you think he's talking about this for a limited amount of time, or do you think he's trying to talk about this for an extended amount of time?
I wouldn't want to speculate.
Okay, and then he also made comments that after this intense phase of the conflict in Gaza concludes in the near term here, Israel will continue mowing the lawn in Gaza. Does the U.S. know exactly what Israel means by continuing to mow the lawn, and do you support that if there's no ceasefire in place?
So I don't know what he means exactly by that, but I think it probably means continued military engagement in Gaza. And for us, that's just a recipe for continued conflict, continued instability, and continued insecurity for Israel. It is obviously extremely harmful to the people of Gaza, who want to be able to rebuild their lives and rebuild their homes and want to be able to chart a different future. But we think continued military action in Gaza just makes Israel weaker, makes it harder to achieve a resolution in the north. It adds to instability in the West Bank. It makes it harder for Israel to normalize relations with its neighbors. And so that's why we will continue to put forward what we believe is an alternative path that actually helps Israel's security, not one that weakens it.
And then just last question, you've obviously expressed U.S. concerns that Israel hasn't been fully focused on the day after conversations. Is that changing at all? Do you think Israel is taking any more seriously those conversations, given that they are planning to wrap up these intense operations? Do those conversations look a little bit different now?
They are a little bit more, they are somewhat more focused on it now. I think just by nature of the fact that they, by their own admission, are nearing the end of major military operations. So by nature, you have to look at what is going to come next. We want them to engage seriously on that. We want them to engage seriously with us on it. We want them to engage seriously with Arab countries in the region about it, because we do think there are ways to rebuild Gaza, to provide security for Gaza, to provide Palestinian-led governance in Gaza that ultimately will not just realize the aspirations of the Palestinian people, but will strengthen Israel's security. And so it's very much in their interest to engage in these conversations in good faith, and we will encourage them to do so.
Sorry, I had one more. I forgot.
Okay.
There are these reports of increased looting and gangs in Gaza, and I wonder who the United States thinks the onus is on to try and drive that down. I mean, is it the IDF that should be creating more law and order? Is there a body that can do that? Like, how do you tackle that problem?
So that is an incredibly difficult question, obviously, because it goes to the heart of what comes next. Who provides security for the people of Gaza who just want to go about their daily lives? Mm-hmm. And right now, in the places where Israel has conducted military operations, but no longer is there on the ground, you do see this anarchy, and you see Hamas in some cases reasserting control, which is obviously something that is incredibly dangerous for Israel. It's incredibly dangerous for the Palestinian people. Just look at the ramifications of the war that Hamas launched on October 7th. They've been, no one has suffered more than the Palestinian people from that decision. So that said, we don't want to see Israel occupy and have Israel soldiers providing security, because we think that just increases tension. It's not going to make Israel safer. It's certainly not going to benefit the Palestinian people. So we are working on proposals with our partners in the region. I don't want to detail them here for, I think, obvious reasons. We'll keep those conversations now, but it's a very important question that we are working quite hard on answering.
And those proposals might have to go into effect even if a ceasefire is not yet in effect.
I just wouldn't want to speculate. We want to get a ceasefire. We want to work on the day after things. Obviously, we would hope that they would align.
Okay.
Yeah, Saeed.
Thank you. Let me begin by asking a question that I've raised here for the past 4 years on this occasion. Today marks the 4th anniversary since the Israelis killed a cousin of mine, Ahmed Arakat, on his way to pick up his mother, and they kept his body. 4 years later, do you think that whatever he did not do anything, but whatever he did, warrants to keep a body and prevent the family from having closure?
So first of all, my condolences to you, Saeed, for the loss of your family member. I don't know the specifics of the case, but obviously we want to see every family be able to grieve for their lost loved ones and properly bury them and pay their respects.
But such a practice is not condoned in any way by anyone.
As I just said, we want to see every family be able to pay their respects.
And very quickly on your response to Simon, now you're saying that the Palestinians or Hamas, uses human or whatever, civilian facilities and so on for their own purposes and so on. Because this is the person that was killed, Dr. Hani al-Jafrawi, in a missile. He worked for the Ministry of Health, which is, a Hamas run, but he's a civilian. He's been doing this job for 35 years and so on. Does that make that clinic a legitimate target?
No, of course not. Yeah. What Israel has said is that there were Hamas militants who were also there and were operating out of there. We don't have the ability to litigate the claims, but as I said, that's what poses such a difficult problem for Israel in conducting these operations, which in no way lessens their burden, but it also makes it difficult in these situations to look at what happened and understand without having all the facts who is ultimately responsible. Israel's responsible for carrying out a strike. Hamas bears responsibility if, in fact, they were embedding themselves among civilian targets. And so it is very difficult in all these, which is why there is no simple answer, and you have to look at each of them and make determinations based on the facts of each case.
Over the weekend, we saw that the Israeli army in the occupied West Bank had a wounded Palestinian man strapped to the jeep and so on. So this is really, by the way, I raised this issue many times before this war, many times, because the Israelis have done this practice since 1967. I don't want to go into details of every incident and so on. But isn't that basically the army using Palestinians as a human shield?
So I will say we saw that video. It was shocking. The practice was absolutely unacceptable. Humans should never be used as human shields. The IDF should swiftly investigate what happened, hold people accountable. I saw the statement they put out that the actions were inconsistent with the orders those soldiers received, that it is being investigated and the people involved will be dealt with accordingly. That is absolutely appropriate.
Just a couple more issues, if you allow me. I want to ask you on the new legal powers of the settlers' facilities in the West Bank, and apparently annexation is underway under everybody's eyes and so on. So
you're referring to the reported actions by the finance minister. So we have seen the finance minister, who also is a minister inside the defense ministry, attempt to further administratively integrate settlements into Israel. We have made quite clear that settlements are counterproductive to peace, that the government of Israel's settlement program is inconsistent with international law, and we will continue to make that clear.
Yeah, but yet the Israelis are never deterred by your position and so on. Could we expect some sort of leveraging some of?
I'm not going to speak to future actions that we may or may not take. I will just say we will continue to make the case to them that actions like these don't just harm the Palestinian people, but they ultimately are self-defeating. They ultimately hurt Israel's interests. They ultimately weaken Israel. They weaken Israel's security. And so that's the case that we will continue to make to them.
And finally, I promise this finally. Mr.
Don't make
Netanyahu.
promises you can't keep, Saeed.
Sorry, I have so many. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, the Israeli Prime Minister, basically rejected the whole Biden plan. And he said, okay, we want to exchange some of the hostages for few prisoners. And that's it. That's the end of it. So do you still think that the ball is in Hamas's court, and not in Israel's court?
So I saw the comments the Prime Minister made yesterday, and then I saw the statement his office put out clarifying that they wanted to secure the release of all hostages. And then I saw the further statement the Prime Minister said today, where he made clear he supports the proposal that Israel put on the table and the President laid out. So I will just say, I think all of us that speak publicly at times make mistakes and misspeak, and when we do so, we have an obligation to come clarify, and we're glad he did.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I have a couple of questions too. First, will the U.S. support Israel in case of a full-scale war breaks with Hezbollah?
So we don't want to see further escalation. We don't want to see a full-scale war with Hezbollah. We think there ought to be a diplomatic resolution to the conflict across the Israel-Lebanon border that is keeping tens of thousands of families on each side of the border from returning to their homes. And so what we will continue to press to the government of Israel is that we don't want to see further escalation. And actually, as I said earlier, achieving a ceasefire in Gaza will help achieve a diplomatic resolution in the
But in case the war breaks,
I'm not going to do it in cases or ifs or hypotheticals or anything like that. I'm going to make clear what our policy is, and that our policy is we don't want to see further escalation.
Second, the Telegraph has reported that Hezbollah is storing a large quantity of Iranian weapons at the airport. Can you confirm this report?
So we've seen the report. We've seen the statement from the government of Lebanon that the report's not grounded in fact. We take these issues extremely seriously and monitor them very closely, but I can't give you a factual assessment from here.
The Lebanese authorities arranged a tour of the airport today. The U.S. ambassador didn't attend. Why?
We did not attend, but we are aware of the tour, and we're actively in touch with the Lebanese government about the issue, including the underlying question and claim that was put forward in that Telegraph article.
And finally, Omani foreign minister was in Iran today. Did he deliver any U.S. message to the Iranian regime?
No, he did not.
Thanks.
Just quickly going back to Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements on how quickly U.S. arms are flowing into Israel. Based on your ongoing engagements across levels of government with Israeli officials, can you say if you assess that that's a sentiment that's broadly held across the Israeli government?
So I really don't want to speak to diplomatic conversations, which ought to remain private, and certainly don't want to speak for the Israeli government. I'll just tell you that in some of our diplomatic conversations, including quite recently, we've pointed out to them specific shipments that we have made in recent weeks to continue to demonstrate our ongoing commitment to Israel's security, and that's not going to change.
And going off of the video that Saeed raised, the State Department said last month that although it's aware of many investigations that the Israeli government has launched, it's unaware of any conclusions of cases, any sentencing that's come down. Can you say if that's changed in the last couple weeks?
So we have seen, I think that was a reference in the NSM to criminal cases that the government of Israel was investigating. We have seen cases where the IDF has disciplined soldiers, including after the World Central Kitchen strike where they did. There have been others for actions in the West Bank where they have publicly announced that they've disciplined soldiers. As it pertains to any of the criminal investigations, I'm not aware of any update. I think those would be publicly announced, so we would all see them. But I can check and see whether there's anything we know that's not in the public sphere. Let me stay in the region before I come to Max. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. It's been reported that the political leadership of Hamas, Iraq and Iran, have decided that Hamas move its offices in Qatar to Iraq, to Baghdad, and that Iran is going to be providing the security and all of that. I was wondering if you're aware of this and what you think.
I saw the reports, and I don't want to speak to their validity, but we have made clear to every government in the region that there should be no more business as usual with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th, and that applies to everyone.
Including Iraq?
Applies to everyone. Any more in the region? Yeah, go ahead. We'll do these, and then I'll
A UK-based research group concluded Israeli tank likely killed 6-year-old Palestinian child, Hind Rajab. Investigation revealed that Rajab's car was hit with 355 bullets, and it's not plausible that Israeli tank couldn't see children inside the car. Have you seen the reports, and do you have any updates on the investigation? It's been more than 4 months, and a lot of my colleagues have been asking about that.
So we have seen the reports, and I will tell you what our latest interaction with the government of Israel is about this. So we went to the government of Israel and pressed them for information, and they told us that there were no IDF tanks operating in the area, no IDF forces operating in the area at the time of that attack, which I believe is something they've also said publicly. After further reporting, we went back to them and pressed them again. And so what they told us is that they went to the UN organizations, they went to the Palestinian Red Crescent, they asked for information, because you've seen all of those organizations quoted in stories. They asked for information that they could use to further an investigation, and no one provided them with any information. That's the latest that we have on the case.
So who shot the 355 tank bullets?
I'm not able to, look, I'm not on the ground. I can't offer any kind of assessment about this. That's why we've called for the government of Israel to conduct an investigation. I can't speak to what their internal processes look like. All I can tell you is what they've all I can tell you is what they've told us, and what they've said is they went to the UN and the Palestinian Red Crescent and asked them to supply information that would help them. And what they claim is that they were given none.
But it's not concluded yet, the investigation, or is it?
No, I would refer you to the government of Israel for that. I can only tell you what they have told us.
Okay, one last question. So the municipality of Gaza fixed the water pipes last week, but 2 days ago, Israeli forces dropped a bomb on the team who worked on restoring the water system, and the bomb killed Anwar al-Jindi, which is director of water and environment at Gaza municipality, and 4 other water technicians. I know you're going to tell me that maybe there were Hamas people next to them embedded, but isn't this excuse like, is it still valid after 8 months and like hundreds and hundreds of healthcare have died because of that?
So I can't tell you anything about this specific strike because I don't have any details about this specific strike. But as I said earlier, the underlying challenge of this war hasn't changed, and it's going to continue to be there as long as you have this difficult urban environment where Hamas does operate as human shields. And I don't think that's
How can we verify this?
Hold on, I don't think that's a controversial assessment. There have been reports going back before October 7th. We talked about them in this briefing. There was a report from the Washington Post several years ago about Hamas firing from mosques. We have seen our own intelligence information and released our own intelligence information about Hamas embedding under a hospital.
But how can you verify in each one that Hamas was there if Israel is investigating this? How can we verify?
That is my point. I can't give you information about each strike. I can tell you that it is an underlying problem that this difficult terrain imposes. And so we see conflicting accounts all the time, and we don't have people on the ground to operate. Ultimately, it's why I get back to this. We have to reach a ceasefire, because as long as you have continued military operations and you have Hamas embedding itself in human shields, firing at soldiers, launching terrorist attacks, you're going to see tragic incidents of civilian casualties, and the ultimate conclusion to this is to reach a ceasefire that will end this suffering. Prem, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Firstly, just to follow up on this, is it really an independent investigation if the alleged culprits are the ones conducting the strike?
What I said, we thought it's appropriate for the government of Israel to investigate. They have said to us, and again, as I said, I'm not attesting to any of these facts. I can tell you that we intervened with them. They provide us answers. I'm providing them to you. And what they have said is they went to these agencies and asked for information, and it wasn't forthcoming.
Sure. So on that note, you said that the Red Crescent, the UN hasn't provided answers. Will you move to verify those claims?
It is not for us to do it. Look, I would hope that. Hold on. I would hope that those agencies can come forward and provide information. It's easy to do so. If in fact they have information, they should come forward and do it. And provide it, and we'll be happy to look at that.
Okay, and then nearly 70 Democrats are calling on the administration to open refugee status for Palestinians fleeing Gaza through the United States Refugee Admissions Program through the State Department. And so I'm wondering if you've seen this call and what the State Department is thinking in response to it.
I have seen the call, and we will respond to the members of Congress in due course.
And then finally, one more question. On a few weeks ago, the U.S. announced that the Azov Brigade passed Leahy Law considerations and will be allowed to receive military aid. A photo from December purports to show, and this was posted by Azov themselves in the Telegram, to show U.S. Special Operations Command Europe giving Azov training. So when exactly was the Leahy Law considerations made that Azov would be allowed.
So I know you asked about this once before, and I will be happy to come back and get you the full details on this. We can do it offline. My understanding is that the Azov Brigade is a different brigade than the one it was originally formed in 2014. But for any further details, I'm just not familiar with them myself, so I'm going to have to get back to you on them.
Okay.